In this video, I'm going to be building this bass guitar I designed from scratch in my garage with basic tools. This video is a compilation of a 20-part series. I had to edit the footage down so this wasn't an incredibly long video. If you want some more information on any of the topics covered, I'll leave a link to the original video playlist in the description. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I had to come outside to film because it's so big. But this is what it's going to look like. So there we got the body coming down. Here we got the neck. And then the headstock. So hopefully you can visualize what this is actually going to look like. But for right now, this is what we're going to be building as a base. So I took the measurements to my local wood supplier and picked up this piece of S4S maple. It's a 7-foot long 2x8, so the actual measurements are 1.5 inches thick by 7.5 inches wide. So the first thing I'm going to have to do with this maple 2x8 is cut into 3 equal length sections. I'm just going to mention, you'll see me using a miter saw and a table saw in this video. These are both capable of turning your hands into hamburger, among other horrible things. I don't see a lot of woodworkers on YouTube mention this, but I know a lot of people who haven't used any of these tools watch these videos. So I'm going to say it. If you want to get into woodworking, but don't have experience with tools, please get some in-person training. These tools are dangerous and can change your life forever in a heartbeat. All right, so I got the 2x8 all chopped up. I also ran it through the table saw to get some fresh edges on the pieces. Now I'm going to show you how I'm going to get these edges ready to join without a joiner. I got my crazy 4-foot long sanding block that I made out of a screen door frame. So you can see I just cut it off. Obviously I ran a file along these edges so I don't get a nasty cut. And then I just glued some 60 grit sandpaper to it. With some rubber cement. I'm going to take the board and actually just do one of these. So I just got done rubbing this board all over my screen door sanding block for like, I don't know, probably like 20 minutes. So definitely a lot slower than a joiner. But what I'm going to do is take my machinist square here and just run it down the length of this to make sure it's square. Spoiler alert, I already did do that and it is square. The other thing I'm going to do is take my 4-foot level here that I know is flat, and I'm just going to put it on top and look for light poking through. And there is none. So that tells me that I have gotten this surface of this board ready to join. So that means I only have 2 more boards to do, one of which is both sides. So it's probably at least another hour of sanding ahead of me. So I'm not going to show that on video. You guys don't need to see me sanding. You saw how I did this board. The rest of them are going to be the same. All right, so I'm just going to glue it up now. I'm going to put glue on each side of each seam. All right. So now we got glue on all of our surfaces. Let's get clamping. Okay, I'm just going to flip this over now so it doesn't get glued down, and I'm going to actually put on a couple more clamps. All right, so here we are. I've let this body blank dry overnight. And right now, I'm just getting ready to pull the clamps off it. All right, so we got our body blank here. It's dried overnight. I've taken the clamps off. Seems pretty good. We got our slab glued together. Okay, so this is the board I will be making the neck blank out of. It is a flat sawn piece of walnut.
It's 66 inches long. It's 5.5 inches wide, and it's just under 1 inch thick. What I'm going to do is cut this piece into strips, turn the strips 90 degrees, and glue them together. So this is going to turn out to be a laminated neck. So that'll give me a little bit better, in my opinion, grain structure for strength and rigidity. I hope so anyway. Okay, so this is the 5 boards, and you can see this was the original grain structure of the board. Now if I turn each one of these 90 degrees, you can see the grain structure is a lot more up and down, and it will be a lot stronger. So I'm not sure that this is exactly how I'm going to glue these together, because if we turn the board around, you can see this end is a little bit better, but I mean, it's still not great. Like, look at this one. But I think probably what I'll do is I'll put the most up and down straight ones towards the center of this. I'm going to be using a different technique to make this blank than I did for the body blank. I'm actually going to end up gluing this together right now as it is. And then I'm going to recut these seams. That should give me a perfect edge. All right, so I have these arranged in what I think will give me the best grain orientation for strength. So that's the one end of the board. Now this is the other end of the board. Admittedly, this end of the board is not looking as great. We'll see how this base neck holds up over years. But yeah, so this is how I'm going to glue them together. So without further ado, let's get to the glue up. Okay, so I'm going to leave this to dry overnight. Then I'm going to come back and cut all these glue seams again and then re-glue it. Alright, so I'm getting ready to take these clamps off and cut these boards for the 3rd time. So last time I screwed this up. I'm just going to be a little bit more careful this time. And hopefully I don't screw it up. Alright, so here we are. This is my last glue up I've done on this thing. So I'm just going to unclamp it now and just give it a quick sand and just see where we're at. So I sanded the neck blank down a bit just to see what it would look like. And I gotta say, this technique really works well for getting some perfect lines. I'd say this turned out pretty good, and I'm pretty stoked about it. So the first thing we gotta do is make sure that this surface, the back surface of our neck blank, is perfectly flat and straight. So how I'm going to do that, because I don't have a proper wood shop or proper equipment, is to use this big sanding block that I made out of the screen door. I'm going to actually attach the sandpaper to this surface because it's a little bit wider. Alright, there we go. Now we just got to attach this to our table and we can get sanding. Alright, so now I have this neck blank kind of clamped into place. Okay, so my screen door sanding block appears to have done a nice job getting one smooth flat surface on this board. So now that's off my list, I can move on to the next thing. So the next thing on my list is to get a square edge next to my flat surface. So I just looked at this with a straight edge, and this edge is basically square to this surface. So what I'm going to do is just kind of clean off this glue that's on here. Alright, that's going to be good enough for what we're doing. So now what we're going to do is cut the scarf joint for our headstock. So I got this neck blank clamped up to this jig I just made. You can see faintly I have the angled line drawn on the blank. You can see it should exit right at the edge of the jig, just like this. Actually, I just set up a bit of an infeed table here. I think it'll work a lot better if I just have this infeed table going. So here we go. Okay, so this is what we're dealing with now. Now we gotta think about gluing this up. So, the way I'm gonna glue it up is like this. The first thing I gotta do is just sand these two surfaces. This surface here, and this surface here. This is just wax paper, by the way. I got my Type On original here. Just gonna put some of this on both of my gluing surfaces. Alright, so I just got this glued up. I've got the headstock glued onto the neck. I got a couple clamps on there, as you can see. Probably put a third one in the middle of that after I'm done making this little clip here. I waited overnight, and now I'm going to take these clamps off and just see how things turned out. Alright, so there we go. We got our headstock glued on. Scarf joint was a success. So, yeah, beautiful. Alright, so I got my jig that I made, and it's a little bit worse for wear. Some stuff got thrown on top of it, but I'm pretty sure it's still going to work just fine. So we're still going to use it. So the thing that I realized is that if I put the neck on it like this, the surface we have to remove is actually going to be parallel to the fence on the table saw. So I'm actually going to go over to the table saw and show what I'm talking about. So what I've done is I've put an extension on my fence all the way down here. And I've also got a makeshift in-feed table. So I can slide this up against the fence, and that puts the blade right there on the headstock. And it's going to push the headstock so that it cuts a slice off of this surface, which is what I want to do. Kind of hard to see through camera, but I've got a line coming all the way down this neck, and that's how much we got to remove off the top of it. You can barely see this, but it's going to come out about here. So much like our last table saw jig, I will be using a 2x4 as my fence. Now I got to attach this neck to this fence. Gonna have to rely pretty heavily here on some super glue. I'm gonna cover the back side of this with tape. I'm gonna cover this surface with tape, and then I'm gonna super glue them together. Okay, so I got my super glue on the back of the neck there. Got my accelerator, gonna accelerate the fence. All right. Just gonna quickly throw a couple clamps on here. Okay, I'm just gonna go get my saw set up now. Oh no. Oh, bam. I totally messed that up. I can't believe I did that. Ah, I totally screwed this up. But aside from that, this technique actually worked quite well. Actually worked really well. I mean, yeah, I got some burns because my saw blade is, you know, probably not good enough or something. But yeah, there. I just wasn't paying enough attention when I was started pushing it through, and it wasn't lined up against the fence. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece. This is the offcut that I cut off of here, and I'm just going to cut. You can see I marked out a square here, which corresponds to this cut. I'm going to cut the square out of here, and then I'm going to sand the radius of the saw blade into it so that it's a perfect fit. Okay, so I got this piece made. It's not the greatest fit in the world, but it's what I'm working with here. So I got that piece glued in there now. I'm just gonna sand it down, get it level with the rest of the neck. I gotta be honest, I think this will be just fine. This surface is gonna be covered by the fretboard. This surface is gonna be covered by the headstock veneer. And so really, it'll only be a tiny little mark that maybe we'll see once the neck is carved. We'll have to see how it turns out. So anyways, what I'm getting ready to do right now is to glue my headstock ears on. So here I have the drawing of the headstock that I made. So as you can see, it is quite a bit bigger than our current headstock. What I did was I cut some strips of the same material I made this neck out of for basically to glue on the side of the headstock. I have it spaced, the headstock that is spaced slightly off the surface of the workbench. You probably can't tell, but it is. So when I go and I take my piece of ear material, it sticks up slightly on the back side as well as on the front side, which is currently facing the table. So I'll have room to sand on both sides is what I'm getting at. So right now I'm just gonna put some glue on these pieces of wood, clamp them on the headstock, and get out of here for a bit. We're all glued up. I'm just gonna let this dry for a little bit, and I'll come back and show you it once it's done. Okay, so there we go. We got our ears glued onto the headstock. So now the next thing we got to do is just get these ears sanded down to the thickness of the rest of our headstock. I'm using my 5-inch random orbital sander with a 60 grit sanding disc. You know what? At this point, I don't even know why I have all this extra length here. It's just making my job a little bit more difficult, so I think I'm just going to cut these off. Okay, now we can get back to sanding. So I got this basically rough sanded to the thickness I want with the orbital sander. You know what? We're going to bring back the old screen door sanding block. It hasn't set me wrong yet. So I finally have gotten this down to thickness. It's flat, it's straight, it's smooth. I'm ready to glue my veneer onto it. So I got these 2 pieces of walnut. They call it hobby board, but it's like a 1/8 inch thick veneer. Problem is it's not wide enough to cover the headstock on the base. So what I'm gonna have to do is glue these together side by side. So I cut one piece in half. I sanded the edges on my storm door sanding block. They're now a perfect match. What I'm gonna do now is just glue this together. And I just got some of my thin super glue here. And I'm just gonna press it together nicely. So it's glued together now. We'll just trace it out. So we've got our walnut head veneer glued together. The headstock is going to fit on it like this. So there should be all kinds of trippy grains on the headstock, which I think will look pretty good. I got some of this birch veneer. Ideally, I would have got maple, but they didn't have it. They just had birch, and I mean, it's pretty close to the color of maple and look of maple. So what I'm going to do is actually sandwich some of this birch in between the 2 layers of walnut. And then what that's going to do is when we go and cut the headstock out, there's going to be like a birch colored line, kind of like a binding all the way around the headstock. So I'll be using my regular original Type Bond again for this. So first thing is I'm just going to get this all glued up. Maybe we'll pull these pins out for the time being. Okay, at this point, I'm just going to put my pins back in just in case this glue starts causing me problems. Okay, so we got our pins in. The next step will be to get our birch veneer glued up. I don't really have a place to put the glue onto this, so it's going to be a bit messy probably. Now we'll put more glue on this side of it. Now we'll put some glue on our walnut veneer. Okay, so we're all perfectly lined up now, all glued. The next step is our glue call. So the first thing I'm going to do though is put some wax paper because we do not want to glue the caul to the headstock. So just like that, just like that. Then we slide our caul over top. Now we're ready to throw some clamps on. So let's just start over here. We got one there. We'll get one there. Put one there. We'll put one there. We'll put one here. And then we'll put another one right here. Okay, so I have let this dry overnight. I'm just getting ready to unclamp this veneer now, see how it looks. Okay, so one thing I am going to do is just trim these veneers down so they're the same size as the headstock. So you can see the headstock veneer is right on that break angle, but it's sticking up way past here. I'm just going to sand it so that this surface will basically continue onto the headstock veneer. Alright, so you can see what I was talking about. I got that big bump sanded down, smooth. So this whole surface is nice and smooth, and my fretboard is going to cover up this part of it. And you can see I sanded the side of the headstock to kind of reveal what it will look like. So you got that nice white stripe coming through there from that birch veneer we put in. I'm going to be cutting the truss rod channel, and I'm going to be using this as my truss rod. It's a Stumac hot rod. It's the 4mm Allen nut version, and I'm going to be putting the adjustment at the headstock. So this is what we're going to be using. We're going to be using a router and this router bit to cut the channel for our truss rod. This is a little warning for those of you that have no experience working with tools, and maybe a reminder for those of you that do. This router spins at like 10,000 RPM and can take a big bite out of you if you let it. If you don't have experience using one of these bad boys, do yourself a favor and get some training on how to use one safely. We've got our fence that is set perfectly parallel to the center line of our neck. Then we've used an offcut from when we cut the scarf joint. No, actually, no, this is an offcut from when we cut the thickness of our headstock. It's got the nice angle we want here, so we're using that. We've stacked up a couple of pieces of plywood as support. Everything's glued together with super glue. Of course, there's painter's tape preventing them from being permanently glued together. So our router is going to come and from this direction, travel along here. Then it's going to hit this little thing here and stop. And this fence is holding it the perfect distance away so that our truss rod channel is going to be perfectly centered on our center line. So now the next thing we got to do is just put our money where our mouth is and cut this thing. So let's get on to it. This time we'll go closer to 1/4 inch. I'm going to go down a bit more. So now we're ready to make our final cut. The little adjustment barrel screw is slightly, well, the channel's not wide enough. So what I'm going to have to do is widen the channel just in that spot. So now it's time for the moment of truth. We've got our truss rod channel made. Okay, so now you can see I have my width taper marked out on the fretboard. So now the next step is to cut this out. I'm gonna get my screen door sanding block back here, and we're just gonna sand it perfectly to the line. So I brought the neck back here. Now the next thing we're gonna do is just put this fretboard on and trace out the shape of our taper. We're also gonna put our headstock pattern on and trace that out, and then we're gonna cut them out. Okay, so there we go. We got our rough shape of our neck cut out. I still have to sand it down to the line. It's looking a lot more like a bass neck, less like a insane piece of crap. So what I got here is a drill press. And I picked up some of these weird flap wheel drum things. And what I've done is I've put one into the chuck of the drill press, and I made this wood piece that has a hole in it, about the diameter of the drum. I just got it clamped onto the drill press, and I'm going to use this as kind of a makeshift sander to help me sand down the rounded shapes, maybe even all the shapes on the headstock. We'll see how it goes. So that actually worked really good for getting this headstock shaped. I still have a little bit of shaping to do once I get the neck down to its final width. Just, you know, feathering it into the headstock, but overall it turned out pretty good. What I'm going to do actually is I'm going to temporarily glue this fretboard on here. So currently I have it lined up on the center line of the neck, and what I'm going to do is I've got two 1/16 inch drill bits here, and I'm going to, in the fret slot at this end of the neck, drill one in. The fret wire will hide this once the frets are installed, so I'm going to put one up here. I'm going to put another one down here, and these will act as locating pins for my fretboard. So when I glue it, it'll be perfectly lined up. So now that I have my fretboard located, you can see I've covered these surfaces with some blue tape. So what I'm going to do is just put a couple of spots of super glue, not too much, and then just glue these two together, and then that will help me in shaping the neck down. Okay, so now this fretboard is temporarily glued on here. I'm going to go back to the drill press and keep sanding it. I've got this as close to the line. The head I think I'm done with, but I've got the neck as close to the line as I feel comfortable with that weird drum sander setup. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sand to the rest of the line with a sanding block. The neck is being cut down to its final taper, and the headstock is also in its final shape. So the first thing I got to do is actually glue a heel onto here. So what I got here, this is the offcut that I cut off the end of the neck. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue this piece onto here in such a way that it makes it thicker. It's actually going to be thicker than we need it to be, but that's okay because we're going to whittle it down a bit. Okay, so I got this heel on here now. It's all glued up. Okay, so I've let this heel dry overnight. So let's just pull these clamps off of here. What I got here, hopefully you can see, is 3 lines on the back of the neck. There's a center line and 2 lines parallel to the center line. Then on the side of the neck, I have a line that runs parallel to the top surface of the neck, and also it is on the other side. So what I'm going to do now is begin shaping my neck. And to do that, what I have to do is basically cut this corner off, stopping at this line here and this second line here. Okay, so the tool I'm going to use to do this is called a spoke shave. It's a pretty basic tool, really. It's old school. So I shave this entire corner off both sides of the neck. And I joined the line that we drew on the side to the line that we drew from the center line. And this surface is basically a flat, this is a flat plane, right? It's a straight line connecting these two lines all the way down. And it's like that on both sides. So what I've done, it's kind of hard to see, but I've drawn a second line here and a second line here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to join those two lines, and that's going to cut off this edge. And of course I did it on both sides of the center line there. I made this final line on the side of my neck, and it's hard to see it, but there is a line right there, which is going to cut off this point here. And I did the same on the other side of the neck. So this is my last two cuts with a spoke shave. Then we'll be doing something a little bit different. All right. So that's it for that. You can see what I did there. That's my body joint fret. I just basically made the line wrap around. And then what I'm going to do is put my template there for the end. I'm going to put my template there for the side. And then I'm going to get started shaping this part of it. And then I'm going to blend them into the neck. So this is how it turned out. I'm pretty stoked about it so far, but I may tweak it a bit before I finish the base. We'll see, I guess. Alright, the time has finally come for me to start working on the body. The first thing I gotta do is just get both of these sides, this surface and the under surface, smooth. Okay, so to be sanding this, I'm gonna be starting off with my 5-inch random orbital sander. And I got some of these 40 grit sanding pads, so that's like super aggressive. And I'm gonna be wearing this dust mask because it's creating a lot of dust. Okay, so I gotta be honest, sanding this body is making me rethink my choices in life. It's brutal. This maple is very hard to work with. It's literally very hard wood. I mean, ideally, I would have put this thing through a thickness sander, but obviously I don't have one. So what I'm gonna do is I got my outline of my body here. I'm just gonna trace it out on here, and I'm gonna roughly cut it out. Normally, you would cut this out, I think, with a bandsaw, but I don't have a bandsaw. What I do have is a jigsaw. Well, there we go. Oh, we got the body cut out. Now I just got to run it through the sander and just get it shaped up nicely. So this is how it turned out. Honestly, I'm pretty stoked about how cool this looks. I think this is going to be a really awesome bass once it's done. I guess the first thing I'm going to do is work on the neck tenon. And right now, I'm actually just going to cut this tab off of here because honestly, we don't need it. So what I got here is I've got my body joint fret drawn here across. It's very hard to see in this light. But I got my body joint fret drawn across here. And then you can see these two marks. They extend all the way to the end, and you can also see my center line there. So that is going to be the width of my tenon. Now if I flip this over, you can see I got my body joint coming all the way around, right? And then you can see on the back I got my center line, and those two outside lines of my neck tenon extending, and they extend all the way down to the edge or the bottom end of the neck. So that's my center line and my two neck tenon lines. So what I'm going to do now is cut this out. So the first thing I'm going to do, I think, is cut these side cuts into these lines. Okay, so I got the first two cuts made. Now we're going to make these long cuts. So that was a lot of work. This part kind of snapped off, so I'm gonna have to clean it up with a chisel. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut the thickness. I've got this line marked along the side here. So what I'm gonna do is cut this line down to here on both sides, and then I'm gonna cut this piece off, this thinner piece, right off. So we got the neck tenon made. At least mostly made. I'm probably gonna have to tweak this a bit. You know, once I get the mortise made, just to get everything fitting perfectly. So now I got my body back here. And what I'm gonna do is just get the center line of the neck lined up with the center line of the body, and make sure that the I don't know what you would call this part of the neck, the shoulders of the heel, I don't know. Get those lined up. Now I'm just going to outline the tenon onto the body. Okay, we got our mortise lined out. Basically, it's the exact same as the tenon. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this out in these lines as deep as this is thick. And the idea is it's going to fit into this hole, and it's going to be smooth, perfectly flat onto the neck when we're done. Okay, so what I got here is my drill press, and in the chuck I have a Forstner bit, and I've carefully set the depth to be just slightly less than the thickness of our neck tenon. And I'm going to use this to remove most of the material from the mortise in the body. So this is where we're at after the Forstner bit. As you can see, I removed a bunch of material, but I still gotta finish cleaning this up with a chisel, so I'm just gonna do that now. Okay, so I gotta say, I'm really super bummed out about this. I just made this neck tenon too big. Like, so frustrating. This is kind of a big deal. So what I'm gonna do is, you know, I probably could just glue this in with epoxy, but us, I was honestly really trying to do a good job on this base. So this is a real bummer. So frustrating. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna clean this out with a router and then just glue in a new piece of maple in here and then just recut this again. Hopefully good this time. And you know, the nice thing is, you know, once this is in here and the fretboard goes on, you know, nobody's ever gonna see the repair. So I mean, I'll know about it, you'll know about it, but it's not gonna be like super apparent. But oh geez, that's so frustrating. But it's the way she goes, I guess. Okay, so just showing you what I'm doing here. I got my straight edge here. I got it clamped into place, and I got a stop piece here. What I'm going to do is come in with my router and just clean up this cut. And then I'm going to reset my straight edge to this side. And I'm going to come in and clean it up. And then I'm just going to glue in a solid block of maple in here. And then I'm going to recut this mortise tomorrow. So, I mean, really, all that's going to be left of this block that I'm putting in here is just a tiny little bit along each edge. But I think this is the best way to do it, and it's going to give me the most solid connection. Okay, so I've cleaned this hole out with the router. And then I made this piece to go into it. So, you know what? It's good enough. This part's going to get covered by the fretboard anyway. And yes, my patch has a patch on it. I accidentally cut on the wrong side of the line. Most of this is going to get removed anyway, so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to run it. We're going to glue this in with some epoxy, and then I'm going to come back and recut this mortise, and hopefully this time not screw it up. Okay, so here I've got some maple sawdust, and here I've got some 5-minute epoxy. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make all this up in here, spread it in here, and then I'm going to throw my block in the hole and clamp it and then just leave it for a bit, and then I'm going to come back and recut it. Obviously this is not ideal, but well, it's the type of stuff that happens here in the danger zone. Okay, so there we go. We've got the block patched in here with epoxy. Just gonna let this dry for a bit, and then I'll come and recut this mortise and hopefully not screw it up this time. Okay, so I've actually let this dry for a few hours now, and the epoxy is hard, so we can get rid of that. Get these clamps off of here. Okay, so I got the repair sanded down. You see what I'm talking about? I got my center line redrawn. Now I'm ready to mark my tenon on here for the second time. Hopefully this time I don't screw it up. Okay, so what I've done here is I just outlined my tenon in blue tape, and I come inside of the pencil line this time. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean a lot of this material out with a Forstner bit, and then I'm actually just going to come at it with a router after that, and then I'm just going to take it real slow this time so I don't screw this up again. I've removed a fair amount of material from there with the Forstner bit. Now I'm going to set up my router and kind of just clean this out. And yeah, take it from there. Okay, so this is my router setup right now. I got my straight edge. It's clamped down there. And then I got this piece of plywood clamped to it. And that's going to hold it on this tape line here. Hopefully that's good enough. And then I got this piece of walnut just glued here as a stop so that I don't go past it. Hope this works out. So you can see the mortise hole is done. It blew out a little bit there, but at this point, I'm just going to deal with it. I was kind of in the zone here and forgot to talk. So I'm just going to do a voiceover. Basically, what I'm doing is very carefully sanding down the neck tenon where it's rubbing, as well as a bit of work on the body mortise. This fitting process took me over an hour to do. I basically had to do small tweaks on every surface of the joint to get a good fit. There are probably way easier and better ways to do this, but this is what I had to do to get it done. At the end of the day, it worked, so that's what I care about. Let me know in the comments if you have any tips for next time I do this. Things went a bit sideways in a couple of spots, but at the end of the day, it's all good. The neck tenon turned out great. The body mortise could be a bit better, but it works. And once the base is assembled, nobody will be able to see the horrors of this video, unless they watch the video. I'm just going to cover the headstock with some of this yellow tape. At this point, we can figure out where our inlay is going to go. So I think this looks best, the way it's laid out, horizontally, this size. So what I did is I went inside and I printed it out on this is just some thick paper. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut it out with an X-Acto knife. And I'm going to use this as a stencil. And I'm going to use it to put the actual letters onto these pieces of pearl. Okay, so we got that cut out. Now we'll take our pieces of pearl. I'm just going to tape them to the back here. Okay, so we got our pearl lined up nice. Now what I'm going to do, just take some primer I got left over from my last project. And I'm just going to spray a couple coats off of here, a couple light coats so I don't get a lot of bleed through. Let that dry, and then I'll know exactly where to cut my pearl. All right, now I'm just going to peel this off because I don't want it to get stuck together. All right, so there we go. We got our DZ marked out on the mother of pearl. What I got here is just a piece of plywood screwed into my workbench, and I got a hole drilled in it with a slot. This is going to be my work area for cutting this out. Now the tools I'm going to be using is a jeweler's saw and just some small files. So the dust that comes off of, you know, mother of pearl or any type of shell really, you do not want to breathe it in. It's very, very important you don't breathe it in. Because I believe it gives you silicosis. Basically, the powder that comes off of this stuff is too heavy for your lungs to expel. Apparently, this is what I've been told. Don't quote me on this. Maybe look it up. But yeah, so it's really bad to breathe it in because once it gets into your lungs, it can't get out of your lungs, and it leads to permanent lung damage. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to have my shop vac mounted here on the whole time, and it's going to be sucking the dust away. But yeah, if you're planning to do any kind of work with any kind of shell on your own, I would really advise you to not breathe the dust in. So that took like an hour and 15 minutes to cut out. Obviously, I sped up the video of me cutting it because it would be an extremely boring video. I broke one blade, so that was pretty good. Anyways, so we got our we got our Z, and we got our D. So I just got some acetone here. Put a little bit of acetone on a cloth and just, here we go. I'm just gonna go over them quickly with a file. So these are done. So now it's time to actually cut the headstock for the inlay. I'm just cutting away the masking tape now. Okay, what I'm actually gonna do here is use the offcuts as a stencil to lay this out. So I'm just gonna get this lined up. So as you can see, I've got my DZ logo on my headstock now. So what I'm going to do is let this dry a bit. And while that's drying, I'm going to explain to you my setup I'm going to use to get rid of this material. So what I'm going to be using to remove this material is a regular old Dremel multi-tool, but I've got this really cool StewMac router base for it. So this allows you to use the Dremel, and of course just like a regular, you know, I don't know what they call that bit, but that's what you know, it's good for removing wood and stuff. So, but anyways, this StewMac router base is really what makes this setup amazing. I'm going to be wearing some safety glasses when I do this. And I'm just going to be cutting out all the primed area there. These pieces of pearl here are about 45,000, well, not about, these are 45 thousandths of an inch thick. So what I've done is I've set this to about 40 thousandths of an inch deep. So it will be sticking a little bit above the surface, and then I'm going to sand that down once it's all glued in. Okay, so that's where we're at now. So at this point, I'm going to switch to hand tools and use a X-Acto knife and hopefully get this dialed in just perfect. So I got the DZ inlaid. Well, cut in. I still have to glue it in, but it's in there. You see that it's just above the surface there. So you can see there's a few gaps. There's a little bit of one there. There's a little bit of one there. But overall, for me, that's pretty good. Now for glue, what I'm going to be using is just some 5-minute epoxy. We got that. We got something to mix it with. We got something to mix it on. And in here, what I got is, this is basically just walnut sand dust I got from when I was working on the neck. So what I'm going to do is mix this in with the epoxy so that when these gaps get filled in, it'll be the color of the walnut and not clear like the epoxy. So I guess the first thing I'll do is pop these out of here right now. Okay. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just dispense some of this. That's probably more than enough. Put some of this sawdust here. I'm just going to mix it up. Okay, so that's probably good enough amount of sawdust. So let's just make sure that it's good and mixed. Ugh. Okay. So it looks like all the gaps are filled now. I'm just going to lightly clamp this. Okay, we'll just let that dry. We'll leave it for a bit, come back to it and see what we got. Okay, so I've let this dry for a bit. Let's take off the clamp and see what we got. Okay, so that's what it looks like after we took off the clamp. So I think what I'm going to do right now is just sand this a little bit and get rid of all that excess epoxy. All right, so I just got a sanding block here with some 80 grit sandpaper. Let's just start with that. So because this is the pearl dust, again, I'm going to vacuum up all this dust just so I don't breathe it in. Okay, so we're almost there. I'm just going to switch this from 80 grit down to 150 grit, or up to 150 grit. Okay, so just lick my finger a little bit so we can see what this will look like with some finish on it. All right, so that's the inlay. I got my fretboard on here located with the locating pins, and I've drawn some lines that basically extend the outside edge of the fretboard down. I mean, to the end of the base. They really just need to go to the bridge. Then I got my scale length marked out, and I've got the saddle for my high string on my bass on the scale length, knowing that the thicker strings will need to have a longer scale length. So then I've got my bridge squared up. It's centered on the center line, and yeah, I just did an outline of the bridge. So now I know where my bridge is going to be, and from there I can figure out where my pickup's going to go, and also know where to drill my grounding wire for this. No need for this to be here anymore. Okay, so now the next step is figuring out exactly where I'm going to put my pickup. So I got one of these EMG Select bass humbuckers. So now we just need to figure out exactly where we're going to put the pickup. So the reason why I put it here is because I'll have room in the future if I decide to put another pickup. But for right now, we're just doing the one. And yeah, it's going to go by the bridge. All right, so now the next thing we got to figure out is where are we going to put the knobs and the output jack. Okay, so actually I think I'm going to put my knobs right there, so we'll have the volume and the tone. These aren't the actual knobs I'm going to use, but you know, they're a good representation. So you can see the bridge there, the pickup there, the volume and the tone. I bought this cool plate for the output jack, but I just don't think it's going to look good. Like, I was thinking I was going to mount it on the face of the guitar or on the face of the bass, but I just don't think it's going to look great there. So I think what I'm going to do is actually put it on the output jack on the edge, but this plate isn't going to work for that. I found this one, which has kind of got a little bit of a radius to it, and it's thinner, so it will fit on the edge. This is off of, like, I think a Les Paul copy. So this is what we're going to use. And I think we're just going to put it, like, the output jack, like, right about there. Yeah, it should be just fine. Okay, so I guess I'll just mark the center of these holes. Okay, I got the center of my knobs marked too. So this is a pattern for our control cavity. So what I got here is the offcut from the pickguard I made for my last project, the Trashocaster. We're just going to need a small piece of this. I have my cover plate marked out. It's the back side of the plastic, but it's hard to see, but I've got a center line there, and I got the radiuses at the end. So I'm just going to cut this out with my coping saw. Okay, so we got that cut out with the coping saw. I'm just going to quickly sand it just to get it a little bit nicer. Okay, so I got my cover plate cut out. So now for my next step, what I'm going to do is drill the center of these holes out with a 1/8 inch drill bit, and I'll use those holes through to the other side to locate my templates. Okay, so I got my body back here, and I've drilled the 2 holes through the body. So what I'm going to do now is draw a center line through these holes. Now I'm going to make center lines this way through the holes as well. So that's what I'm talking about. I got the center line first, and then off that center line I drew these center lines, and they're perpendicular to that one center line. So now I can take my template and line it up on these lines. Perfect. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to remove some of this material with a Forstner bit before I hit it with the router. I've got the depth set, so should be good to go. So I got painter's tape on this, I got painter's tape on this, and then I got some super glue and some accelerator. Okay, now I'm just going to clamp this down. What I'm going to be using to cut this out with is a templating bit. So it has a bearing on it. The bearing rides on the template and allows you to get a perfect cut. All right, here we go. Okay, now it's time to pull the template off. So, that turned out good. Turned out real good. So now, we just need to do the recess for the cover plate. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so there we go. We got our control cavity cut. We got our recess for our cover plate made. And it fits in there beautifully. So on to the next step. So the last thing I have to do is open up these holes that I drilled through with a 1/8 inch drill bit. So they need to be the diameter of the shaft of my potentiometers, which is just under 3/8 inch. So I'm going to take a 3/8 inch Forstner bit and just open these two holes up. Okay, so there we go. We got our potentiometer holes opened up. So I got the Forstner bit set to the depth that I want for this pickup cavity. Now I'm mainly going to focus at first with a 1/4 inch on the corners, and then I'm just going to remove a bunch of material so that I'll be able to easily clean it out with my router. Don't have enough throat to reach the final hole. So I have to do it the old-fashioned way, I guess, with a hand drill. Okay, now I'm going to use a bit bigger of a bit to remove a bit more material from this. That's as good as we're going to get with this. Alright, so that's what I removed with a Forstner bit. I would like to remove more material here, but I don't know. My drill press just has a really small throat and I wasn't able to reach it. So I'm just going to use what I got, take it from there. So I got my template here. I'm just going to attach it with the blue tape and the super glue again. Okay, got my body clamped. Alright, here we go. Okay, so now we got our cavities. We got our pickup cavity, and we got our control cavity. The question is, how do we get our wires from the pickup cavity into the control cavity to the output jack, and then also to the plate on the bridge, because there has to be a ground wire that goes to the bridge. So the solution is really long drill bits. What we're going to do is come in through the neck pocket. We're going to drill into the pickup cavity, and we're going to keep drilling until we land underneath the bridge. After that, we're going to come in through the output jack, which is down here, and we're going to come in on such an angle that passes through our control cavity and ends in our pickup cavity. So that will allow us to interconnect all of our electronics with wire. And also the added benefit is there will be a channel that travels from here to here. So if down the road I decide I want to put a second pickup in this base, all I'll have to do is cut the hole for the pickup. I won't have to worry about, trying to run wires through it after the fact, which once this neck is glued on, it's going to be a bit of a problem. Beautiful. Now here's the thing. I need the hole for the output jack to be fairly big in diameter. So maybe I'm going to start this with a Forstner bit. Okay, so I broke right into the cavity with this Forstner bit. I'm switching back to this guy. Perfect. Okay, so we've made some serious progress here. We got the output jack hole made, and it connects with the control cavity. The control cavity has a hole. Let's see if we can see all the way through here. So you can see my finger at the end of that hole there, causing the light to go off and on. That's me sticking my finger in the pickup cavity. So we have our control cavity attached to our pickup cavity. Now we also have a channel here that goes underneath our bridge. So what I'm going to do now is drill a hole from underneath our bridge plate into that channel. And once that's done, we'll be able to connect all the wires on this base. So I just got a 1/8 inch drill bit here, and I'm just going to drill down through here into the channel underneath our bridge plate. Okay, I think we're through. I'm going to run a piece of wire in there and just double check. So we got it. So what you see there is a wire going underneath the base plate for our bridge. So we got our ground wire. So right now I'm getting ready to drill the holes in the fretboard for the fret markers. So I've got them all marked out in pencil, and I've got little pieces of blue tape on each fret that's getting drilled because, well, knowing me, I would somehow screw that up. So hopefully this is good enough that I won't screw it up. Now the other thing I got going on here is I got a 1/4 inch Forstner bit. So this 1/4 inch bit fits my fret markers perfectly, and I have it set at a depth that will not drill through the fretboard and will give me enough. There'll be a little bit of the pearl sticking up after it's done that I can sand it flush with the surface of the fretboard, and it will be beautiful. So I'm just going to drill these out right now. Okay, so there we go. We got our fretboard drilled for our fret marker inlays. I'm actually not going to glue these in right now. I'm going to glue them in later. I just wanted to get these drilled first before I glued the base together because I figured it'd be a lot easier than when the base is one massive piece. So now I'm getting ready to open up these holes to accept my tuners. All right, so there you go. You can see I got the holes drilled through here, and they're stepped, so they're a little bit wider on the top and then a little bit narrower on the back side. So now I'm getting ready to do the round over on the edge of the body. I'm just going to be going with an 1/8 inch round over, and all that's going to do is just break the sharp edge. Okay, so that turned out great. The edges have been rounded over. I still need to obviously sand. There's a little bit of a ridge there. So now I'm actually going to glue the neck onto the base. The first thing I'm going to do is just spread some inside of this neck pocket. So I got some glue on all surfaces of the neck pocket. I'm going to also put glue onto the neck itself, but I'm going to put a little bit of this walnut dust powder into it because there's a few really small superficial gaps, but I would like them to be filled in the color of the neck. I'm just going to mix the glue up with some of this. There we go, just a little bit, just to give it just a little bit more of a brown color. Now, as I said, I'm going to spread this on the actual neck. Now for the rest of it, I'm just going to use the regular type on. All right. Okay, to glue this, I just have a wood block wrapped in wax paper. I'm going to put it right there. And then I'm just going to throw a couple of clamps on here. All right, so the neck is glued. Well, the neck is clamped on, the glue is drying. So now all we got to do is wait for this glue to set up. So it's been like 4 hours, and I'm going to take the clamps off of here, and we're going to see how good this neck is glued onto this body. Oh yeah, perfect. The next thing we got to do is put in our truss rod. So I just got this stuff here. It's basically just window sealant. Hopefully this will work. We'll find out, I guess. I'm going to be extra careful and just put some tape on either side so that I don't accidentally get any of this on the gluing surface. So now we'll get our truss rod put into place. It's good I put that tape there because I did make a bit of a mess. Okay, now the next thing StuMac recommends is covering the truss rod channel with some 3/4 inch tape before you put the glue on, so glue doesn't get into it. I don't actually have 3/4 inch tape. I have this, which is like closer to 7/8. So I'm just gonna put it on and then just trim it. Okay, so I've got my strip of tape laid over top of the truss rod. I cut it down so it's a bit thinner than 3/4 of an inch, but it is completely covering the truss rod. So I've seen some people online saying like, you're just supposed to leave this on here when you spread the glue. Lots of people also say they just leave it on and glue the fretboard on with the tape in there. To me, it makes more sense to glue it on with the tape in there. So that's what I'm going to do. And yeah, see how that goes. Okay, so I'm just going to give the back side of this fretboard a quick sand. Just, you know, roughen it up a bit. I'm just going to wipe both of these surfaces down. Get any kind of extra dust off of them that I can. All right, so now I'm just gonna have to glue this on. Okay, got a nice layer on the neck there. Let's get some on the fretboard. Okay, so we got a nice layer of glue on both surfaces. Now I got a couple of 1/16 drill bits that I'm using as locating pins. I'm just gonna install those. Okay, so now I gotta clamp this. So I went ahead and I made a caul, which is basically just a piece of wood. I wrapped it in wax paper, and I also drilled some holes in it so that it can go around these pins. So let's get that on there now. And I've also got this block here that I'm going to put on the back side of the neck. I'm just going to get this a little bit higher off the workbench, so I got some more room for my clamps. Just going to throw some wax paper on here as well, just to be safe. Okay, one clamp is on. Okay, second clamp is on. Get some of this squeeze out of here while we can. Get another clamp on here. And another one. Get one over the body. And I think we'll just put one more. Okay, so we got we got 6 clamps on here right now. If I had more, I would put more, but I don't. So we just got to work with what we got. I got the fretboard clamped on there between 2 cauls, which will distribute the force from these clamps. And I'm just going to leave it sitting like that. Okay, so it's been a few hours, and now I'm going to remove these clamps. So there we go. We got a glued together bass guitar now. What I'm going to do now is just glue these mother of pearl fret markers in here. Okay, so these are all pretty good fit in these holes. There's not a big gap around them. So what I'm going to do is just use some of my runny super glue and just put some runny super glue along these, and that'll glue them in. So now I'm getting ready to drill these side marker dots into my fretboard. So these are the side marker dots. They're 2mm mother of pearl. I've got a corresponding drill bit that's really long enough to reach these from this angle. And what I'm going to do is just go along and just drill all these out, and then I'm going to put the fret markers in, then I'm going to glue them, and that'll be that. Okay, so this is what I'll be using to sand and polish the fretboard before I put the frets in it. From here to here, we'll be using a sanding block. This is a 16-inch radius StuMac sanding block. From 2400 to 12,000 grit, the polishing, we will be using micro mesh, and the micro mesh just has its own little foam kind of sanding block. It's going to start with this 150 grit here. I'm just going to sand this until these pearl markers are down to the surface of the fretboard. You do not want to breathe this pearl dust in. So what I'm actually going to do is grab my shop vac and actually vacuum this. Okay, so I think I'm done sanding it with the 150 grit. I've got everything leveled down nicely. So I'm just going to check it with my straight edge. Yeah, it's looking good so far. Okay, so I just finished sanding it with the 150 grit and also checking it with a straight edge, and it's looking good. So now the next step that I'm going to do is move up to the 220 grit. So now we're moving on to 220 grit. Okay, so now we're going to move up to 320. Okay, now we're going to move up to 400 grit. Okay, so here we go with the 600 grit. Okay, now we're going to move up to 1000 grit. Okay, now we got 1500 grit. 2000 grit. Okay, so now we're going to move up to the micro mesh. So right here I got 2400 grit. Now I got 3200. Now 3600. Now 4000. Now 6000. Now 8,000. And finally 12,000. All right, so there we go. That is what a fretboard looks like after you polish it up to 12,000 grit with micro mesh. It's very smooth, beautifully smooth. So now we're ready to put our frets in. So here I have some StewMac medium guitar fret wire. I'm just going to run a piece of fret wire through here and hopefully get enough bent up that I can get rid of this thing for right now and get it out of my way. Okay, so there we go. I got a couple of pieces of bent fret wire here. What I'm going to do for each fret is I'm going to cut a piece of my fret wire off, roughly the length I need. And then I'm going to take my grandpa's old hammer and then just pound it in. And we're going to move along and do each fret like that. Okay, so now the next thing I got to do is trim off all these jagged fret ends. Okay, so now we're all trimmed up. The next thing we got to do is just run a file along the edge of these. All right, so I'm just going to cover the surface of this fretboard with some painter's tape just to protect it while I'm working here. Okay, so we got the fretboard covered in painter's tape just to protect, you know, the surface of the fretboard, which will not be getting finished. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is sand this entire base with 150 grit, which is going to get rid of all my 80 grit and 100 grit sanding marks. All right, so I got to do some grain filling. All right, well, that's the front side of that. Let's get to the back side of the neck. All right, I guess we'll start up here. Okay, so there we go. I got the grain filler basically smeared on this entire surface of the walnut. So I let this grain filler dry overnight, so it's definitely dry now. Now what I'm going to do is sand everything with 220 grit. All right, so I just finished sanding this whole thing down with 220 grit sandpaper. Honestly, it's starting to get real smooth. So I'm going to be staining the body, but I'm going to be doing a clear finish on the neck. So I don't want to actually get any stain on the neck. I've got to actually seal the neck before I start staining the body. Normally with lacquer, there's such a thing as lacquer sealer, but I'm using spray cans. I'm using the same type of lacquer I used on my last project, which is acrylic lacquer. This is just stuff that you can get at like the auto parts store, but they don't make a lacquer sealer in this stuff. So I'm just going to spray a coat onto it, and hopefully that works good enough as a sealer. I'm pretty sure it will. My fingers are crossed. So I'm just going to tape off the parts I do not want to get lacquer on, which is the maple, basically. The next thing I'm going to do is take my acrylic lacquer and just spray a coat over the walnut neck. Turned out pretty nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let this sit for a minute, and then I'm going to actually peel this tape all off of here because I don't want it to basically get glued on with the drying lacquer. What I'm going to try to do is make this base really bright green in the center, and then around the edges it's a little bit of a darker green, so it's kind of like a sunburst from like a darker green into a really bright, vibrant green. So what I'm going to have to do is mix up 2 different shades of green. Now with aniline dyes, apparently you can mix them with water. I've always known that you mix them with alcohol. So what I'm going to use is some methyl hydrate. I don't know if this is the right type of alcohol to use. It's just what I have. The instructions say to use rubbing alcohol, but I'm going to use this. So if this doesn't work out, it's my fault. So the first thing I'm going to do is just pour some alcohol into these bottles. That's probably good. Put on some gloves. Let's just put a piece of wood down so I don't ruin my cardboard right off the bat. Okay, so maybe the first thing we'll do is just get some yellow put in these. Okay, so that's looking pretty bold. So I just have a piece of maple here, so I can kind of see what this will look like on it. Just take a little bit of this, maybe a little bit more. So yeah, it's pretty yellow. I think I'll start adding my blue in now too. Wow, that really darkened up quickly. Oh, it doesn't look as dark. Alright, so that's more of a green. I feel like that is better for the lighter portion of it. Let's work on the darker part of it. So I'm gonna add some more blue into here. We'll make a note that this is the light. It's definitely darker green. Let's add a little bit more. Add a little bit more yellow too. It's definitely a bit more. I liked it a bit more blue than that though. Okay, so we got 2 shades of green there. Now let's see if we can blend between the 2. So I'm just going to use some alcohol on the rag. Kind of get a bit of a blend there. Okay, so I got my base back here. And the first thing I'm going to do is just put a whole layer of this light stuff over the whole body. And I'm just using regular shop towels for this. I should also mention, apparently you can also put this on with like an airbrush. I was kind of wanting to do that for this, but I didn't end up getting an airbrush. So we're going to do it this way. Yeah, hopefully it works out good. Okay, so we got our lighter of the 2 greens applied to the base. So now I'm going to take out my darker of the 2, and I'm just going to go along the edges with that. Okay, now comes the tricky part. I got to fade the dark into the light. So the first thing I'm going to do is just dab along the edges with my dark. So that's looking pretty good. Now I'm just going to take some straight alcohol and just kind of soak down a rag and maybe try to just blend between the two a little bit. All right, I'm just gonna let this do his magic and flip over and do some on the back now. So again, this is a dark stuff here. And we're just gonna dab along the edges. Okay, now I'm gonna take some straight alcohol and just, again, try to blend it a little bit better. Okay, you know what? I think I'm gonna actually come back with a little bit of this light stuff here on the back and just kind of do a little bit of once over with that. You know what? I think I'm just gonna leave it. I think I'm just gonna leave it like this, let this dry out, and yeah, take it from there. All right, so I've let this dry and it's looking all right. That looks a little bit splotchy, in particular on the back. That is actually just from the grain of the base, because I didn't use fancy, you know, fancy maple with a nice grain. I used, honestly, cheap stuff, so that's why it looks splotchy. It's just where the grain is. So my next step now is I'm going to lay a layer of clear on this and just bury this stain in here so that yeah, it's locked in. So first thing, I'm going to be wearing a dust mask when I do this. So I'm not really going to be narrating this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray the face of my headstock first and probably the back of the headstock. Then I'm going to hang it up and then proceed to spray the rest of the body. You'll see what I'm doing. Okay, so I've let this dry overnight after spraying 2 cans of the acrylic lacquer on it. So what I'm going to do now is just give it a quick sand. I'm just basically sanding between clear coat so I get a nice smooth finish. I think the last time I did this, I used like 400 grit. I don't have enough 400 grit. So I'm actually going to try 600 grit. Instead of sanding it with soapy water, I'm going to be using some more of this methyl hydrate, which is alcohol. Just be aware that this stuff, obviously it's alcohol. It's extremely flammable. I'm doing this nowhere near any kind of ignition source. This can light up real quick, potentially very dangerous. So, you know, be aware of that. So I'm just going to put a piece of this on my sanding blocks. Alright, so things aren't going as smoothly as I would like. Well, that's normal for me. So you can see here, I sanded through the green a little bit. Got a little bit too greedy. So that sucks. And also happened here on the back. And I also got these weird white marks, which is, I think, because I let the alcohol soak in to the lacquer too much. I'm just going to try and touch up these green marks if possible. But, yeah, not too stoked. Okay, so I'm just going to try and use a heat gun to get rid of these kind of milky marks. I think this is what kind of like what happens if you put a cold drink on your coffee table without a coaster. So I'm just going to try and dry this area out. Okay, so I did some touch-ups. It's not perfect, but you know what? What are you going to do, right? It's kind of a learning experience for me, to be quite honest. On the bright side, I was able to heat those milky areas out of here. So I think it was like what I was thinking. The alcohol just got soaked into the finish, but it's out now. So at this point, I'm honestly just going to spray a few more coats of lacquer on here. Hopefully that's a good idea, but I guess we'll find out. So what I'm going to do now is wet sand it again and then put one more can of acrylic lacquer on it. All right, so here we go. So I've got this thing sanded down. Of course, it wouldn't be a Danger Zone project if I didn't sand through my color coat on my last sanding. So right here, I've sanded through the green. So I'm gonna have to touch that up with a bit of the aniline dye, but you know, in all honesty, I could put another coat on here and then actually sand it again and then put a 6th can of lacquer on here. But you know what? I'm just gonna call it at this point. At some point, you just gotta say good enough is good enough. I know that that's kind of a frowned on thing to say in the guitar building world, good enough, but I'm saying it. Okay, so the first thing I'm gonna do is just give this a really good wipe with just some alcohol. I did this after the last time I sanded as well, but I don't think I mentioned it. Just give it a good wipe and make sure it's clean. Just make sure there's no residual crap on it. Well, I think that's about as clean as it's gonna get. So I just got some of this aniline dye here and I'm just gonna touch up these spots I sanded through. Ideally, you would not sand through your color coat, but it seems to be like an ongoing thing for me where I always sand through my color coat. Even before this channel, I sanded through my color coat. So it's nothing new, it's just, you know, clearly I'm not that great at finishing, but whatever. So my final can of acrylic lacquer. This is can number 5. I'm just gonna spray this on. And just a side note, I got this mask on, I got the back door of my garage open, and I got the man door open, so there's air flowing through. That being said, this I don't think is the correct mask for the lacquer, and honestly, this stuff stinks really bad, and it'll put you on another planet if you're catching my drift. So just keep that in mind if you're gonna try using acrylic lacquer. You need some good ventilation. So hopefully now our clear coat is thick enough that we can buff and polish it. So I'm going to reluctantly wet sand this. I'm going to start off with some 1500 grit, and I got a bowl of soapy water here. Now we're just going to give it a sand. Okay, so here we got some 2000 grit. Okay, so after sanding it with 2000 grit, it's starting to look a lot better in terms of orange peel. First thing we got to do is start with our buffing compound. So I don't know if you can see that, but it is a super glossy finish. You can really see the reflection around this area. Like, you can see my WD-40 can. Right? Like, that's pretty good. Okay, so that's as much as I can do with the machine. Inside of these horns and in this part of the head, I'm gonna have to do by hand. So just gonna do that now. So you're supposed to use one towel to put this on and another to take it off. But because I'm using like barely any for this, I'm just using the same towel and just using a clean spot on it to take it off. Okay, so I'm trying to capture how shiny this is, but you can really see the gloss on it, hopefully. That's just after the compound. Yeah, it's looking real good. And now we're going to use this ultimate polish. Alright, so now the base is all buffed and polished. I guess the next thing I should do is start putting it together. So maybe the first thing I'll do is peel this tape off of here. We're going to put some tape here so we can draw on the surface of the base. Okay, so I got my bridge position where I want it. I'm just going to take this, an awl, and mark these holes, and then I'm going to drill them out. I'm not going to need this tape on here anymore, so I'm just going to peel it off. So one thing I will have to do before I attach this bridge on here is attach a ground wire to it. So that hole there is for the ground wire. I feel like this isn't a very good solder connection, but it is on there. So I'm just going to cross my fingers that this works. Run our wire in here. Beautiful. All right, so now I'm just going to drive in my 7 screws that hold this bridge on here. Okay, so the bridge is on there. So now the next thing I'm going to do is just put some shielding in this electronics cavity. Okay, so there we go. I'm also going to line the back of the cavity cover that I made. All right, so there we go. Okay, so we're going to take the potentiometer, and it's got this kind of lock washer thing. We'll put that on first, and then we'll install this into the body. So we'll put this one in here like that. We'll do the same with the other one. Put the lock washer on it. Put that in the body. Okay. And then from the other side, we've got a regular smooth washer and a nut for each one. And I'm just going to very carefully tighten these with a wrench. So I've got my capacitor. So let's get that in there. Okay, beautiful. And we'll just trim the ends of this lead off of here, just so it's not causing any kind of weird connections we don't want. Okay, so we got our capacitor in there. They actually have this lug of the pot touching the case of the pot. So this is turned into a ground. And then this one here is turned into a ground. So we'll just do that. Connect the back of each pot with a black wire. Now we can throw a white wire onto our volume knob. Okay. All right, so this is where I'm at right now. Going off there. I don't know how much sense this is going to make, but that's what it looks like. Okay, so now my next step I got to do is get my I need to get a wire from my bridge plate, my ground wire, and my pickup wire in to this cavity. Okay, got the ground wire in. Now we got to get our pickup mounted in this pickup ring. All right, so we got that. Get these wires in there. Okay. So now we need to drill 4 holes for this. So I'm just going to pull this out of here temporarily. Drill our holes. Okay. Okay, so we got our holes. Let's throw our screws in now. From our pickup, we have our white wire, which goes to our middle lug, and our black wire, which goes to the back of the pot. All right, then the last solder joints we got to make are just for the output jack. Okay, so unfortunately for me, my second camera died, so I'm just going to show you here what it looks like. So this is a wiring diagram, and this is what it looks like. It's kind of tight in there. It's hard to see, but yeah. And then I got my output jack here. So what I'm going to do is mount my output jack on this plate, attach a plate on there, and then put my cover plate on here. Okay, so we got the control cover plate on, and we got the output jack plate on. So while we're here, let's put our strap buttons on too. Okay, we got one there. And then I think we'll put the other one right here. Probably one of the most important parts is our skull number 13 knobs. So the last thing I'm going to be doing is installing these tuners. So the first thing I'm going to do is just install these ferrules, and they basically just push into these holes. Something has gone wrong with the finish on this bass. I'll show you what I mean. I don't know if you can tell, but the neck versus the head, the neck looks milky. So if we zoom in on the heel, you can see it's totally cracked, you know? And it's the same kind of thing on the headstock. If we zoom in, you can see that the lacquer is just cracked and it's gone milky. There's a few possible reasons why this happened. The first, at least what my first assumption is because I was using methyl hydrate to wet sand this between clear coats. Since I did that, I've learned that, you know, straight alcohol is too abrasive to use, and it can actually damage the acrylic lacquer. So that might be part of it. The other thing I learned is that, well, if you put the lacquer on too thick, it can become inflexible. And then if there's a change in temperature or humidity, it can cause it to crack. Now, I don't think I put it on that thick, but you know, I've been wrong in the past. And then the final thing is, well, I had this bass in my house in a nice, normal, comfortable room temperature. And for my last video, for the last segment where I was putting the heads, where I was putting the tuners on here, I brought it out and it was below freezing outside. So with lacquer finishes, if you go do a rapid temperature change, like from room temperature to below freezing or from below freezing to room temperature, it can cause the lacquer to check, which is crack. So that could be the part of the problem here. But that being said, this base is painted with acrylic lacquer, which is apparently more flexible than nitrocellulose lacquer. And acrylic lacquer is what they use to paint cars. So you would think that it would be more resistant to temperature changes than from room temperature to just below freezing. That's not that wild of a temperature change. So I kind of feel like the methyl hydrate I used to sand this thing kind of screwed up the lacquer. And then maybe it was too thick and the temperature change, even though it was a small one, just pushed it over the edge and caused it to check. I don't know. I'm just a guy in his garage building a bass. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a professional painter. I'm not a professional luthier. I just want to mention it because obviously it looks kind of messed up. But at the same time, I don't really care. This is my personal bass, and you know, I guess we'll probably have to go the relic route on it, I guess. For right now, I'm just gonna keep going with it. I'm gonna finish this up and you know, move on to other things. Maybe come back to this later and refinish it. Maybe paint it an opaque color. Maybe do something different. But yeah, I just wanted to be fully transparent with you guys that you know, not all is well in the danger zone. In fact, that's why it's called the danger zone. So the first thing I'm gonna do is make sure my frets are level. Now you can buy all sorts of fancy tools to level your frets. Well, what I like to use is just a regular old level. So the first thing I got to do is actually glue some new sandpaper onto it because this stuff is disgusting. The next thing I'm going to do is just tape off my fretboard, I guess, so I don't accidentally screw that up. And I'm also going to tape the body. Now we're going to get our level back here. Just attach our strips of sandpaper to it. Okay, so there we go. We got a level, and it's got, you know, sandpaper stuck to it. So we're going to use that as our sanding block to sand our neck. So now I'm going to take a black marker and just color each fret so that it is black. Okay, so all my frets are colored black. The next thing I'm going to do is take my level and just rub it gently back and forth. And that will show us if we have any low spots. Alright, so I've leveled these frets. The fret surfaces are all perfectly flat. Flat as my straight edge. The next thing we have to do is crown them. And what I'm going to do is go over each fret, filing the top of the fret until this shape is reestablished. It's really hard for me to show this on camera for whatever reason in my filming situation, but all these frets have been crowned. So they're back to their original fret shape. The next thing I got to do is put a bevel on the edge of each fret. So what I'm going to use to do that is just an axe file. I'm just going to put it on an angle and just run it up and down the edge of the frets until they are beveled. Okay, so now that I've got the bevel on the edge of my frets, the next and last thing I got to do before I polish these is just shape the end. So what I'm going to do is I got some needle files here. I'm going to take one of these and I'm just going to go around the very edge and just round these sharp corners off. So now it's time to polish the frets. So for this, as I always do, I will be using my micro mesh. So 2400 grit, 3200 grit, 3600, 4000, 6000, 8000, finally 12,000. All right, so there we go. Got the frets nice and polished, beautifully shiny. Very shiny. So now the next step is I can get rid of all this stupid blue tape and start working on my nut. Okay, so we got all that blue tape off of there. And something crazy happened while I was doing that. Right here. That circle, I scratched the lacquer off with my fingernail. This finish is really not good, and I doubt it is going to last for very long at all. I'm probably going to have to refinish this. Like, look, it's all fractured around those frets. Like, what the heck? It's got to be the methyl hydrate. That's the only thing I can think of why this finish is getting screwed up so bad. I mean, it's got to be the methyl hydrate. But it is what it is. All right, so here we go. We've got our nut material. So this is a piece of bone. First thing we got to do is just get it sanded down so it fits in our nut slot here. So I've got my nut sanded down to width, and it's fitting in the nut slot nicely. So now, I guess we'll cut it to width. Okay, so we got the nut cut to width, cut to thickness. It fits in the slot nicely. The next thing we got to do is figure out where we're going to put our strings. So you can see I've got a line drawn on the nut now. So that is where I'm going to file my nut slots to. So it's from this pencil lead sitting on the frets. Right? So that's a little bit of distance above the fret. So should be good. So here we go. I've got all my string spacings marked out. And then beside each string spacing, you'll see a little horizontal line. That is the thickness of the string, represented as a height. above the bottom of my fret slot. So what I'm going to do first is kind of sand the top of this nut so that it's close to those horizontal lines. Then I'm going to cut my slots with some fret files. I guess the first thing I'm going to do is have to do a whole bunch of sanding on this. Alright, so I got the top of my nut shaped roughly the height of my strings above the the radius of the frets, which is the bottom of those three horizontal curved lines. Now I'm going to take my fret files here. I got some StewMac fret files, and I'm just going to cut these slots to depth. Alright, so this is my nut so far. It's been a little while since I made one, so hopefully this works. We'll see. The thing we need to do in this video is make a truss rod cover. We need a cover that's going to be, let's go 1.25 inches by 2.5. Okay, so here I have a piece of this pickguard. Been using this on the last couple projects. I use this to make the back cover plate for this thing. So we'll just use a piece of this to make our, truss rod cover here. So, okay, now we'll just cut this out. Alright, so now we've got our shape made for our truss rod cover. I'm just going to drill and countersink some holes in it so we can mount it to our base. So, turned out pretty good. I mean, especially because I just eyeballed those holes where they're going. So, now we just got to put it on the base. I'm actually just going to put some of this fretboard oil on this fretboard. I'm just going to wipe off the excess oil on here. Alright, that should be good. Okay, so I can tell right off the bat I'm going to have a problem here because I didn't put a bevel on the end of my fretboard. So when I put my high string in here and have it going towards the tuner, it's basically rubbing on the fretboard. So the first thing I got to do now is actually put a bevel on the edge of this fretboard. So we'll take the truss rod cover off. Honestly, we're probably going to have to do a truss rod adjustment once this thing gets set up. So we'll just leave it off for the time being. I'm just going to cover this area with some tape just so I don't wreck it. Now, probably the easiest and most normal way to do this would be to use a chisel. Okay, so now I have a bit of a bevel on there. I'm just going to make sure that this works with my strings. And if it does, I'll just give it a quick buff with some micro mesh so it doesn't look ridiculous next to the rest of the fretboard. So as you can see now, the string clears the end of the fretboard. Okay, now I'm just going to polish this up. There we go. Now it's beautiful. Okay, let's get back to putting these strings on here. So now I got all my strings on here. Let's tune it up to pitch. Alright, so now we got it in tune. Let's take a look at our action. This is some treacherous action. So, there's a couple things we got going on here. First of all, I think the neck is bending forward or bowing a bit. So we'll tighten up the truss rod. The other thing we can do is we still have some adjustment in our saddles. We're just going to lower these saddles down. And, hopefully that's good. So the first thing I'm going to do here is just adjust my truss rod. So I'm going to loosen these strings just a little bit. Now, you take an Allen key and basically just put it into the truss rod. And then how a truss rod works is righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So if you tighten it up, it will cause the neck to straighten out. Or with a dual action truss rod like I have on this base, you can actually make the neck back low, but we're not going to do that. So I'm going to tighten this up to straighten it out a bit. If you were to turn the other way to loosen it, it will create a bow in the neck, which is what we're trying to get rid of. So we're going to tighten this up. Okay, so now I have adjusted my truss rod and also I've retuned it. So, that's helped us a bit with our action, but I think it's still a little bit high. And if this was a bolted on neck guitar, at this point, I would probably start thinking about tilting the neck back, but we cannot do that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to lower these saddles, see how low we can get them, and see how good we can get our action. So to lower the action on these bass saddles, you just take an Allen key, put it in the little Allen hole, and then you just either loosen it to lower it or tighten it to raise it. So I'm just going to lower these down and we'll see where we're at after that. Got to lower our pickup a little bit. Okay, so after adjusting the saddles and the truss rod, I have some unfortunate news. I'll just come out and say it. I should have put this neck on with a bit of back angle. I put this neck on with no back angle. It is flat with the face of the body. As you can see here, I have these saddles as low as they'll go. I also have the truss rod cranked up so the neck has very little relief, meaning it's pretty straight. With this current combo, I was able to achieve the following action at the 17th fret. 6/64ths on the E string, 6/64ths on the A string, 5/64ths on the D string, and 4/64ths on the G string, which is about as high as I would want to go. Ideally, I would have a bit more relief in this neck. That would work better for my playing style to prevent buzzing. The problem is, when I increase the neck relief, my action goes up. So the way I have it set up now is as good as it's gonna get. It's just the way she goes, I guess. So how could I fix this? The proper way would be to remove the fretboard, steam the neck joint until the glue releases, reshape the neck joint so there's some back angle to the neck, glue the neck back on, glue the fretboard back on, and then fix the finish. Well, we both know I'm not going to do that. So what I am going to do is cut a recess into the body so the bridge can sit a bit below the surface. Not a lot, maybe the thickness of the base plate. But this will create a new problem. I won't be able to load the strings. So I'm going to have to either modify this bridge so the strings pass through the body or just get a new bridge. But I'm not going to do that right now because honestly, I'm kind of sick of working on this thing. And I have a new project I want to get working on. After all, this bass does work the way it is and it's totally playable. So let's worry about setting our intonation. Oh, and normally you would do this in the playing position. I'm doing it like this for filming reasons. So you make sure your string is in tune, which it is. Now you fret it at the 12th fret. So you can see there, I'm a little bit, flat. So what I actually got to do in this situation is make my string a little bit shorter. So to do that, I'm going to loosen this Phillips head screw here. Okay, now I'm going to retune my string. There we go, and we'll fret it at the 12th fret. So we're pretty close. I'm a bit sharp. So I'm going to tighten this saddle, which will lengthen the string, which should make it flatten out a bit at the 12th fret. Tune it again. So it's in tune, open, and then it's in tune on the 12th fret. So I'm just going to do that for the rest of these strings and speed it up. Okay, so our intonation is set. So our action is set, our intonation is set, it's time to try it out. Now, I don't actually have a bass amp, so I'm just going to be plugging this into my guitar amp, but for filming purposes, I think that'll be just fine. So the volume works. Let's turn the reverb down. So the tone works. Let's just make sure all the frets play nicely. Okay, so all the frets work. Perfect. Now let's just play it a bit. At this point, I'm going to put the truss rod cover back on. Alright, so I just want to show something. That is the remnants of that patch I had to make when I screwed this up on the table saw. So you can barely even tell that it's there. So it turns out it wasn't even a big deal to begin with. So that's it for this video. To be fully honest, this bass isn't a masterpiece, but that's okay. This is the first bass I've ever built, the first instrument I've designed and built from scratch in over a decade, and I did it in my garage with a very questionable setup. I definitely hit a few snags along the way, but in the end, I have a one-of-a-kind, fully functional bass, and I learned a bunch of stuff the hard way along the way. And with a bit more work, I'm sure I will be able to make this bass truly awesome. So anyways, if you found this build interesting, I want to see how I improve this thing. When I improve this thing, make sure to subscribe. And if you're still watching, do me a favor, leave a like or a comment. It really helps with the channel, and I appreciate it. So until next week, talk to you later.